Welcome back, tubers. This is another episode of the Other UFO Show. Dr. J and Dr. V, big man and thin man on the couch. Dr. J?
Dr. V.
How are you this day?
I guess this is our Halloween show.
This is our Halloween, a little bit belated, but it's still Halloween.
We had a busy Halloween.
Yes, it was very busy indeed. We ended up doing a radio script of War of the Worlds. If you'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit more about that, the history behind War of the Worlds.
We didn't reincarnate, but we recreated the Mercury Theater on the air. The October 30th, 1938 CBS radio broadcast here locally. Actually, we did that a couple nights ago, and we had a great time with it. Even managed to lift the original music from the original broadcast.
Because it is UFO related.
Mm-hmm.
I believe myself that it's related to the history of UFOs in our country. It came out in 1938, was it?
I've always thought of course, it was adapted from the H.G. Wells novel. I think it was published 1897, 1898. But I've always thought the Mercury Theater, War of the Worlds broadcast, which of course made Orson Welles famous overnight, was really the archetype for crashed flying saucer stories, which Roswell being the most famous of them. But, a meteor crashes near Grover's Mill, New Jersey, and a Princeton astronomer goes out there to investigate it, along with a reporter. And, of course, it ends up being extraterrestrial and Martians, even though the professor had his doubts. Two real-life Princeton astronomers heard the first half maybe not the entire first half of the show before the Martians came out, but they hopped in their car because they wanted to go out and find this meteorite that supposedly crashed. And they kept listening to the show on the car radio, and all hell's breaking loose, and the Martians are coming out of the Jersey marshes and heading towards the Hudson River. And these guys are like, there's nothing out here. There's nobody out here. There's nothing happening. And they were kidded for the rest of their careers. See any good crash meteors lately?
Yeah, even though it would be legitimate for them to go out and look for a crashed meteorite, that's for sure.
And of course, they couldn't help but wonder who is Professor Richard Pearson of the Princeton Observatory. What did we hear about that name?
I think that's one of the things. Grover's Mill is actually near Princeton. It was close enough for a selection that it would have seemed feasible that somebody from Princeton would have gone there in order to look at this, shape from outer space. It was fake news before there was fake news.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
On the radio, and it was just by chance and accident that people happened to tune in before the disclaimer at the beginning that it was a Mercury Theater radio program going on.
But there were little clues during the broadcast that there was something wasn't quite right. The Martians got here awfully fast.
Yes.
Boom! There's an explosion on Mars.
240 million miles later.
Something crashes in Hackensack, New Jersey, or where it was. And it says, this from the Government Meteorological Bureau at 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Well, at that point, it's 8:15 on the East Coast.
It was a 45-minute flight, I think, from Mars.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, looking at the time period, it took 45 minutes for them to fly from Mars to Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, less than that.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the show, we hear about the incandescent blast on Mars, and
Right.
10 minutes later, we're in Grover's Mill where something crashed.
People panicked, but it seems like the press exaggerated that panic afterwards because there was this conflict going on between press and radio at the time, because press, thought radio was going to drive them out of business, and radio thought they could perhaps drive, the printed press out of business. So it seemed like there was an exaggeration of that, where people were supposedly jumping out of windows and dying.
There were so many things that came together that made that show a success. Going back to Princeton, another real Princeton professor, Hadley Cantrill, was fascinated by the reaction to the show and how many people took it seriously. And in 1940, he published his findings, and he determined that about 32 million people were listening on radio that night. That's 32 million households. So that number could easily double, quadruple.
At least 4 per household.
And he estimated 1.5 million people were listening to Mercury Theater on the air, and 1 million of them actually took the show seriously to some extent or another. A lot of people got in their cars and headed for the hills. The switchboards were jammed for CBS, for the police stations, for the fire stations. People just did, what should we do? A lot of people went to church. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured. Nobody dropped out of windows or anything like that. The mainstream print media did really hype it for all it's worth because they saw radio as an upstart and a threat to their advertising revenue. CBS was sued, Orson Welles was sued. Nothing ever came of those lawsuits because there was no precedent.
I remember seeing an interview with Orson Welles where he kind of admitted tongue-in-cheek on his contriteness on the day after interview, where he was, apologizing and all that. And he seemed to be like, more in his older years saying, "You suckers, we knew exactly what we were doing." One other interesting fact about that night is that the state police came in and actually confiscated all the scripts.
No, actually, that was the New York City police.
New York City police, okay.
Because there was always a representative of the network in the studio. And next thing you know, the cops came in, and the show had just gone off the air, and they were just snatching up scripts. And only one survived, and that was by the guy who wrote the radio play. He did not have a sponsor, so there were no commercial breaks.
Right.
They ran it straight through for an hour. Audiences were used to as a midway point for station identification, but they were 40 minutes into War of the Worlds before they finally got to, you were listening to Columbia Broadcasting System Mercury Theater on the air, an adaptation of H.G. Wells. But by that time, people had quit listening and they're piling into their cars.
So I kind of wonder about that break being put at that time. Right in that specific part of the script is pretty well planned too as well.
Well, all the action is in the first 40 minutes of the show. In the second half, I've always felt as boring compared to the first half. Very nicely written. Well, actually overwritten. I think that whole show was overwritten, but it worked.
What it added to in the UFOology is, again, like you said, that sort of description of something falling from the heavens and crashing into the earth, that may have been put into the psyche of, the person that's trying to look for UFO stories. But during that time period in the 1800s, when there was almost this desire that there would be life on Mars, and the discovery of the canals on Mars.
I think it was in the 1870s. An Italian astronomer by the name of Schiaparelli noted what he saw what he thought were channels on Mars. He had a pretty good telescope. Well, somehow when that got translated to English, it became canals. And canals are man-made.
Mm-hmm.
And an American astronomer, Percival Lowell, just took off with that, built himself a huge observatory in Arizona, and published a lot of articles about the possibilities of there still being life on Mars, but it's a dying planet. And they built the canals to get the water from the polar caps. And at that point, in the early 20th century, it was not crazy to believe in life on Mars. Mars was a very popular concept, actually. It wasn't until they started building better, more powerful telescopes that they realized that they were not canals, that they were possibly dried riverbeds or just weird stuff in the atmosphere. And there are no right angles, clearly nothing made by intelligent beings.
Some would argue otherwise still. There are people that want to argue otherwise, even though you can clearly see. So there's still that kind of hope that goes through this mythology of UFOs, including the flying saucer.
By 1938, though, by the time of the War of the Worlds show, the popular conjecture theory of if there's life on Mars, it's microscopic, nothing intelligent. Yeah, well, that was the first little historical boo-boo, channels being translated into canal. June of 1947, the modern era began for ufology when Kenneth Arnold had his sighting. He described 9 silver objects in a very nice formation. He estimated their speed to be in excess of 1,000 miles an hour. And a reporter asked him, well, what were they shaped like? And he said they were shaped like a crescent. And then he asked him, well, how would you describe their movement? And, well, like a saucer skipping across the surface of a pond. Well, the reporter liked that one and coined the phrase flying saucer, even though Arnold had said it looked like the heel of a shoe with a bite taken out of it. But from then on, people weren't seeing flying crescents, they were seeing flying saucers.
So it is interesting how something that becomes well known within the masses through the mass media, through television, through radio, through print, at least those times, and nowadays in the internet, how that can influence probably what people might be seeing or how they see something in the sky, You know, you may not see an entire object in the sky. You may see it from a different angle or something like that. And then if you're thinking saucer, it might look saucer shaped, when in reality it may be a sphere of some kind, but just presented in such a way that you can only see it as a saucer.
I like what you said about fake news, because
Mm-hmm.
a few years after the War of the Worlds radio show, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and most people first heard about that on the radio. And a lot of those people said, wait a minute, you got me with that Martian thing a few years ago. Why would the Japanese bomb Hawaii? And then, so again, now we're back to 1947, and the flying saucers show up. And our military was understandably nervous, especially when Kenneth Arnold, who was, Mr. Front Porch, he'd be perfectly at home on a jury. This is the kind of guy you'd love to have on a jury, Mr. All-American Citizen,
Mr.
saying
Normal.
that these things are going at 1,200 miles an hour, silvery, shiny, and perfect formation. Well, the Air Force knew we didn't have anything like that at all in service or even in development. It was highly unlikely that the Russians would, and if they did, why would they be testing it over this country? So they went to Werner von Braun down in New Mexico, who was shooting off surplus V-2 rockets, and they asked him, Dr. von Braun, were you Germans working on anything that even remotely has the performance characteristics of these flying saucers? And von Braun said, if we had been, I would have known it. What does that leave? And so there were a couple, that was batted back and forth in the Pentagon for a while. They said, yeah, but we can't come out with this alien thing. Remember that Martian thing a few years ago? How many people took that seriously? Do you want that to happen again? The unofficial policy was just play it down. Play it down. There's nothing to see here, folks. Keep moving right along.
Swamp gas,
Mm-hmm.
Venus in the sky.
Yeah, you saw birds, you saw shooting
Flock of
stars.
birds
Yeah.
on the radar. It was birds.
Mm.
And going back to the psyche of the nation, so to speak, is I was talking to a 9-year-old boy just the other day, and got around to UFOs for some reason. And I asked him, I said, do you even know what a UFO is? And here he is at 9 years old, and he says, yes, they suck you up and take you away. The young developing mind can already have a concept of what a flying saucer or unidentified flying object is, and that it's alien related, or at least abduction related. There is already this programming within our minds to be expecting a certain thing.
It's become such a big part of the popular culture. I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up with comic books and flying saucers and Lost in Space and Star Trek and science fiction. And now we have the millennials and the younger people. They're perfectly okay with alien. Well, of course, anybody knows what an alien is. Are you stupid or what?
Of course there's life on
Yeah.
other planets.
Uh-huh.
We know that because there's other planets that could sustain life.
Yeah, it's just...
It's more a matter of fact.
Yes, a lot of people took War of the Worlds seriously, partly because of the climate of the time. Hitler was on the loose in Europe. World War II was 1 year away. We were still in the middle of the Depression, hard times, and
the birth of a new medium.
there was fear, there was anxiety. People were kind of on edge because of the world situation. Nobody wanted the United States to get into another war. Now you go into the early 50s with flying saucers, we're in the Cold War.
That's right.
And nuclear weapons and air raid sirens, and oh my God, when are the Russian bombers going to be coming over the horizon?
Be prepared.
Of course, that was
Be
before
prepared.
that was before the intercontinental ballistic missiles, but still, the Russians had a bomber fleet. We had a bomber fleet.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
And how are you going to look for those bomber fleets?
it was fear and paranoia.
Looking in the skies.
And I said, oh, now we got these flying saucer things. And what if it really is a real Russian attack?
Wow. You have a theory
Oh,
on
here we
that?
go, another one.
Okay.
Oh, what crashed in Roswell? It didn't
Uh-huh.
crash in Roswell. It crashed 70 miles away from Roswell. Roswell was the closest town.
Nor was it taken to Area 51, but we talked about that previously. There's a lot of things that turn out having their own mythology that build up, and things are added to it throughout time, generations.
But hey, that was no Martian. It's Halloween.
That's right. How's that full thing to say? It's not the green googly gobbly ghost on your front porch.
No.
It's the equivalent of CBS saying boo. We hope you look forward to seeing our rendition of War of the Worlds, which will be posted up here later. Filmed more professionally than we can do ourselves.
No, this is our state of the art right here. Keep looking
Oh,
up.
I said your name. We got to edit that out. So, folks, we hope you look forward to watching War of the Worlds, our rendition of the radio play anyway. And remember, stop looking down at your phones and start looking up to the skies. What's with this owl?